Okay, well, let's get started for the day. As you know, this is the voice of Michelle McNerney. Thank you for joining. Hopefully we will be done early today and you can all enjoy your Friday. So just a quick reminder of why we're here. This is a call that was designed to give the chief elected officials an opportunity to ask questions, seek clarification, and provide us an opportunity to provide you guidance and technical assistance. So we will continue with that purpose. Today, just a couple of quick really updates and next steps on where we're at, nothing specific, but we do have quite a big agenda for our next call, which I'll talk about at the end of the day today. So again, if you have any questions, just dive in and ask at any time, but otherwise, please try to stay on mute so we don't have any background noise. The first thing we're going to talk about today is procurement timeline for the one-stop operator procurement. So this screen probably looks familiar to you. We've been sort of living and dying by this chart of our deadlines of the key tasks that you were all set to accomplish in this past year. And I'm happy to report that the vast majority of you have accomplished the vast majority of these tasks. So kudos to you. It was basically exactly a year ago that Lori and I, along with some other IWD staff, finished up our tour of Iowa, where we provided CEO training on roles and responsibilities. And to think how far we've come in that amount of time is great. That's just really a testament to your dedication and just the effort and hard work you've put into this, and even throughout the pandemic. So great job. And I'll just say it's been fun working with you and getting to know you, even though some of this stuff has been difficult. So thank you for all of that. So if you look at this, you'll notice that there are big red X's through the deadline for the selection of the one-stop operator. And I guess I didn't really realize when I was doing this morning quickly that it does say and direct service provider after competitive procurement process. So the red X's are in relation to the selection of the one-stop operator. I've spoken with the Department of Labor, explained to them where we're at in accomplishing some of these key tasks, and they have agreed that the procurement of the one-stop operator is really not the most important thing for us right now. So this deadline of having a one-stop operator procured by December 31st is no longer applicable. Now, procurement of the service providers and contracting in place by January 1st is still the goal and the deadline. So as you all know, if you're operating in a local workforce development area that currently has an extended contract through December 31st with the existing service providers, those contracts are ending on December 31st. So you will need to have completed an RFP and extended contracts to a service provider. It might very well be the same service provider. That's not a problem. But the contracting process has to be corrected by January 1st. So that deadline still is in play and important for us to meet. But one-stop operator is not. So I know that there are several local areas who have put out a one-stop operator RFP recently. So kudos to you for getting that done. I guess what I would tell you is that, it's your choice whether you want to go ahead and fulfill that right now. If you felt rushed or anything and you want to pull it off the table, that would be completely up to you. But it's not a requirement to have in place by January 1st at this point in time. So I'll just pause there and ask if there are any questions about that. The other thing I will say is that pulling that deadline gives us some time to provide some additional guidance as well. And we can work to do that in the coming months. But does anybody have any questions about the one-stop operator procurement being delayed?
Michelle, this is Michelle Wilson in Southwest Iowa.
Hi.
Hi, I'm curious if we have an idea of when the new deadline will be or not.
No, we did not set a new deadline. And so honestly, what I think I'm going to do, Michelle, is flip it almost and not necessarily set a specific deadline, but ask the local areas independently what their plans are going forward, right? Because you are all very close to being in a place where you have compliant local boards who have been certified. And so remember when we talked about this from the very beginning, and it seemed so far away that it was never going to happen, but that, once that local board is in place and can be up and functioning, a lot of the work falls to them, right? And, while the CEO is still a very important role to provide final oversight and approval on certain key tasks, a lot of this stuff does fall to the board. So one of the things that I plan to do next week is, and I'll just jump the gun a little bit on my agenda here. You beat me to it, Michelle, is send an email to each local area and sort of summarize where we're at with your individual tasks, and then ask the local area to provide me a timeline of when they think these things can be accomplished. You know, if somebody could say, we hope to RFP a one-stop operator by March 31st, I think that's acceptable. If somebody says it's, you know, December 1st of 2021, we're probably going to chat about that and figure out a way to make that happen faster. So I don't have a hard and a fast deadline right now. I don't want it to completely to come off your radar because it is something that needs to happen. But the focus really needs to be on procuring those service providers before the one-stop operator at this point. That's the key, right? We want to make sure that in all of these local areas, we can continue to provide services on January 1st because obviously there are a lot of customers out there that need services right now. So sort of answered your question, not directly, but hopefully that gave you an idea.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you, Michelle.
Yep. Okay, well, hearing no more questions, I'm going to go on to the next slide and give you just some updates. So I think I've hit on this very clearly already, but service provider RFPs, hopefully you're in the thick of that right now and going to be able to execute on that by January 1st. It's going to be very important. So, you know, if you have any questions about that or you're having challenges, I guess please reach out to me so that we can be prepared, because if you're not going to be able to complete that, we need to be discussing plans for how services will be provided on January 1st in your local area. So just make sure you're communicating with us about that. I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. Let me hang that up. Spam. Local board training got underway this week. We did local board training in Southwest Iowa and North Central, I think. Gosh, I can't even remember anymore. Lori, do you remember? I think that's right.
No.
No, you don't either. Anyway, you know, training like that is always very interesting. The same thing happened when we started with CEO training last year, where the first group probably got way more of the fire hose of information than subsequent groups will get. But we did receive really great feedback from both sessions and the board members that attended. There was great turnout and high attendance, which is fabulous. And they gave great feedback, and they know that it's a lot of information, and we very much reassured them that this is just sort of the first stop and that we will continue to provide any technical assistance that's needed as we move forward. So at this point in time, we have 7 out of the 10 local boards scheduled for training, which is fabulous. And we'll just keep plugging away on that. So that's great. Another thing that I want you to be aware of, for those of you that are in a local area that are working on those extended contracts directly from IWD, next week I'll be sending out closeout information to those current service providers. And so the reason for that is that the grant that they're operating on and the contract that they're operating on is going to end. So even if you do the RFP process and you select them again, you'll do that under a new contract. So they have to do final closeout of the contracts that they're under. So I'll be sending them information. It will also contain information about how to hand off or handle any files in case it is a new service provider in the area and things like that. So if you have any questions or if they ask you questions, that information will be coming out. I'll make sure to CC you, but just so you're aware, hopefully that gives them, you know, about 2.5 months, plenty of time to undergo that work that needs to happen. So also, gosh, I'm sorry. The COVID NDWG grant applications were due earlier this week. We got 7 areas that applied, so that's awesome. Our team here at IWD will be reviewing those applications within the next week or 2, and we'll hopefully be able to get decisions out in that same time frame and get awards issued. And so just as a reminder, we will release those funds to the designated fiscal agents in your local area. And so that's great. And so speaking of fiscal agents, we have 9 fiscal agents. Well, I think we have 8 because there's 2 areas that are using the same one. So, but every local area has designated a fiscal agent at this point. All of the master agreements are in the review process at IWD. So they will be going out next week for fiscal agents and Cleos to sign. So that's a huge step. And then we'll be able to start adding funding to those and so on and so forth. So great job on that as well. Also today, just this morning, I got the last 2080 agreement or shared liability agreement submitted to the Secretary of State. So all of you have officially 2080 agreements on file there, and that task is completed across the board. So that's phenomenal work as well. And we have 5 of our 9 local workforce development boards certified at this point. So like I said at the beginning, you guys have made phenomenal progress, and I really appreciate your hard work on all of this stuff. So any questions about this stuff? Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody else had a question. I'll wait. Go ahead. Well, I just want to say, like, the work that has happened in Iowa in the past year, the amount of work is extraordinary. And I hope that you all realize that. You all have moved forward in significant ways. And I mean, I don't know what I'm feeling right now, if it's pride or what, but I am just so happy for you guys and thrilled to see the progress, and can remember the looks on faces, like a year ago when people just were looking overwhelmed and maybe a little unhappy or even angry, like, just all sorts of thoughts and feelings as you were trying to process things that had happened and things that needed to happen to move forward. And it probably felt like it was not even accomplishable, if that's a word. So I just wanted to echo what Michelle has said. It's really phenomenal, and you all should be proud. So that's all.
Thanks, Lori.
You're welcome.
Are there any questions about the information that I covered on this slide? Okay, it doesn't seem like it. So let me go forward to next steps. So I think I'm ahead of myself all over the place today. So again, fiscal agent master agreements are all prepped and going through review at IWD. So they'll be getting sent out next week. And that's a huge step as well. So a couple of things that are going to be on the horizon. So local area performance negotiations need to be taking place. So we will be getting those scheduled in November, probably towards the end of November. And so we will plan to provide some guidance on that at the next CEO office hours call. And if we don't do it then, I promise we'll provide guidance before we actually execute the local area performance negotiations. Again, this is a process that we as a state go through with the local area to determine the target performance goals for the 6 different real performance measures across adult, dislocated worker, and youth programs. So we'll continue to provide some technical assistance on that. And then that's probably one of the first things that the local board will take over and accomplish. So that'll be great. There is another program that we all have not talked about very much, and it's called Ticket to Work. And so just very briefly, Ticket to Work is a program run through the Social Security Administration, and it's a program that provides financial benefit to assist people with disabilities who are on Social Security, SSI or SSD income to become employed and eventually hopefully not need to be on those benefits anymore. And so what it does is it generates what they call ticket money or ticket revenue to the providers, or not the providers, sorry, to the local area for assisting those customers in becoming employed and maintaining employment. And so each of the local areas participates in this automatically and generates funds. Program year 20 ticket funding across most of Iowa, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty details, but is about $300,000. And so that money gets divided out across the local areas based on how much of it each local area generated themselves. And it's another source of funding. Now, there is a pretty specific intent to these funds, which is to reinvest in the workforce system to help people with disabilities have programmatic and physical accessibility to things that they need for employment. So you could use those funds to buy somebody assistive technology they need to have a job, or improve the center's physical accessibility, things like that. So I have our Ticket to Work program expert, Brian Dennis is his name. He's newly joined our team, but he's been working with the Title I program for a long, long time and has a lot of experience with Ticket to Work. He's going to come to our CEO call next week and give you all an overview about that, because there's some decisions that need to be made about that funding and where you want it to go and how you want it to be administered and things like that. So we'll talk about that on next week's CEO call. And we also will talk next week, or not next week, 2 weeks. I'm sorry, it's October 30th, the next call in 2 weeks. We will also talk about program year 20 monitoring of WIOA Title I. So I think, again, since last year, we've been talking about the need to monitor. And I know, Miranda, if you're on the call, and Rick, if you're on the call, that you have emails that you've sent me that are still sitting in my inbox because I can't fully answer your questions yet, but you've been asking for guidance on monitoring and how you can start monitoring in your local areas, which are great questions to be asking and are things that every area needs to start thinking about. So what we're going to do at the next CEO call is provide an overview of the monitoring schedule. So we will begin monitoring each local area in January 2021 for PY20. And we'll provide you, the tools that we're going to be using, the guidance that we're going to be using, so that you can in turn start using that to complete your local area monitoring of your providers and all those things. So we're going to give you that hopefully well in advance so that you have time to get used to it. And I do just want to remind everybody that every time you hear the word monitoring, everybody gets nervous and immediately thinks, oh my gosh, we're going to be in trouble. That is not the point, right? I mean, we are required to monitor every local area annually. So that is us fulfilling our requirement in the law. But this monitoring especially is a baseline monitoring. Obviously, the vast majority of these local areas are brand new. And even if you're not brand new, you're sort of level setting, right? So this monitoring for PY20 will be a baseline monitoring. It absolutely has the lens of technical assistance, which is how all successful monitorings should be viewed. So, it's a way that we can examine what's going on and take a look at what sort of technical assistance and guidance can be provided to improve services in your area. So that's what will happen. And again, we'll talk more thoroughly about it on the next CEO call. And then lastly, one of the other next things that the local boards will begin to tackle is the local plan. And we talked about it briefly. We've talked about it briefly during the local board trainings, which is great. But next week at the State Workforce Development Board meeting, the state board will be voting on core partner jointly issued local plan guidance. And once that is approved, hopefully, then we will be able to turn around and provide guidance to you all about how those plans should be written, give you an outline to follow to write those local plans, and give you some guidance on deadlines for those. So that guidance will probably be coming in early November. If we can get it ready by the next CEO call, we'll cover it then as well. So those are the next sort of big things that are coming up from us. Does anybody have any questions about any of those things before I go on to the next questions? No. Okay. We're very quiet today, which I understand. It's cold here. It's making me sleepy. Okay. So I guess now we'll open it up for questions. Before I do that, I did receive one question in my email for today's call that, Lori, I apologize. I'm going to put you on the spot. So I received a question from one of the CEOs asking if local governments, or like the county, I think, can they voluntarily contribute to administrative funds if the local area doesn't have enough or they want to have more? Is that something that's allowable?
Sure. Yep.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I think, so the easy answer is yes. I think then what also has to happen with that is, there has to be a written agreement, understanding of where those funds are coming from, how those funds can be used, and what's the accountability on that. But yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. That's awesome. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions that they want to chat about today?
Hi, Michelle. This is Heather Garcia. And hi, thank you for all the work you're doing to certify the boards. I know that that's a huge job. And with Central Iowa, we have one individual that we felt met the membership requirements to represent their entity in two different ways. Her organization happens to be an employer in an in-demand sector, and the employer also is a community-based organization. So we want her to wear those two different hats when she's serving on the local board. And with the membership requirements in the e-policy, it does talk about how the local board members must be employed by the sector they represent. And then there is a piece in there that talks about the representatives from proprietary schools cannot be considered a business sector member, which leads me to believe that educational entities could be both education representatives as well as business representatives. And then with number 7 in that section, it does talk about an individual may be appointed as a representative of more than one entity if the individual meets all the criteria for representation, including the criteria described in 2 through 6 above for each entity. So I think where maybe the difference in my interpretation of this policy lies in that word entity and how it refers back to sections 2 through 6. And my interpretation of entity was the sector representation and not employer, because it is difficult, I think, for most of our board members to have two separate employers with that opening statement that board members are required to be employed by the sector they represent. So if you wouldn't mind providing a little additional guidance or explanation on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually went over this with our head legal counsel, and because I had the same question about that line 7 within the policy. And so the question, let me find my notes actually, because I had to write it down because it is very confusing. And so I actually asked the exact same question. And in the law, is it referring to entity being the, the sector, the type of position on the board, or the entity the person physically works for? And our interpretation and the way that we're applying the law is that a single person can fill 2 roles if they're representing 2 separate entities, meaning I work for XYZ company, so I fill the business role for XYZ company, but I also serve on the board for ABC Corporation, and so I also can fill a role for, ABC, a community-based organization, so I could fill a role, both roles, because I have 2 different entities that I am representing on the board. And in this situation, the person that you're talking about, she absolutely meets the qualifications to be a business representative or a workforce representative as a community-based organization, but she's trying to do that working for the same entity, and it needs to be 2 separate entities. So
just to clarify with your example, as somebody that's seated on a board, and I'm looking forward, and I'm sure that our other board support individuals might get a little chuckle out of this, looking forward to fill seats already as things do change, and we do constantly have to look for new board members. With this statement, the local board members are required to be employed by the sector they represent. If someone is serving on the board, they aren't necessarily employed. So are you saying that that opens us up to board members who are not technically employed by those sectors?
No, I mean, you have to follow the policy and the law. So maybe I misspoke on saying employed by versus or whatever. But again, before I provided you that guidance, I ran it through our head legal counsel, and that's the interpretation that we're following and using. So she needs to work for 2 separate entities to fill those spots.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I know we haven't had a call in a couple of weeks. I've been frantically trying to get all this work done. So thank you for being patient. And I know this one, there wasn't a lot of, great content, but I think the next CEO call, which will be on October 30th at noon, will have a lot of really important content. So when I send out some emails, I'm going to send you some emails about that ticket to work information ahead of time. So I'll also remind you then that we're going to be discussing it on the CEO call on the 30th. So hopefully that'll be good information for you. And as always, in between the calls, if you have any questions or issues, you need to contact me. I think you all have my phone number, my email address, everything. So just get a hold of me and I'll help in any way that I can. So thank you all for joining today, and we will talk in a couple of weeks.
Bye.